Welcome to the Fellowship Kansas City Kids Home Edition. I have a question for you. Have you ever waited for anything? Like waited and waited and waited? Maybe when I said that you thought about waiting in line for your favorite ride at an amusement park or waiting to go ride your favorite water slide at a water park. Maybe you're thinking about how you wait and count down the days or the sleeps until your birthday each year. Or now, you're waiting on Christmas. We're all waiting and counting down until Christmas. You're waiting to open those presents underneath the tree. You want to see, am I going to get the Star Wars Lego set? Maybe the special car for my Barbie? We're waiting and waiting. And as you wait 18 days and 10 days, they all sound and feel like so much time to wait because waiting isn't easy. Our lesson this week was how God's special people waited for Jesus to come. They waited for the one that God promised them. And they waited generation after generation. See, they started waiting. People started waiting for Jesus way back in Genesis. Remember the story of creation and how God created everything in our world, the land and the trees, the birds and the animals and people. And then Adam and Eve chose to disobey God. They sinned, and God had to send them out of the Garden of Eden. At that point in time, God had a plan, and he promised that one day someone would be born of a woman who would crush the plans of Satan, crush the head of Satan. He promised to send one to take care of that sin problem. But the people had to wait. Many of you know the story of Abraham and his wife Sarah, who had no children and were old. And God told Abraham, I promise that you're going to be the father of many nations, and from you, from your family, will come one who will bless the whole world. God promised this one that would come from Abraham's family at a time when Abraham had no children and it seemed hopeless that he would have children. And Abraham had to wait, and God's people waited. And over throughout our Bible in the Old Testament, God's people would wait on this promised one, and God would send prophets, people who God gave special messages to give the people hope and to give the people direction. And the prophets would talk about this promised one. The prophet Isaiah, 700 years before Jesus was born, not only talked about the promised one, but he gave the people details about how this promised one would be born. Isaiah talked about how the promised one would come from the family of David. The promised one would be called Emmanuel, and he would be born of a woman who had never been married. 700 years before Jesus was born, and the people waited. The prophet Micah talked about how this one would be born in Bethlehem and would be part of the family of Judah. Now, Judah was Abraham's great-grandson, so also part of the family of Abraham. He was the promised one, but God's people had to wait. And then when Jesus was born, in his birth, he fulfilled every one of those prophecies about his birth. Every single thing the prophets had said about how this promised one would come came true with Jesus. But first, God's people had to wait, just like we wait. This Christmas, as you wait for Christmas, we want you to remember that Jesus is that promised one, that he fulfilled all of those prophecies, But I also want you to remember that we no longer have to wait to know Jesus. We get to know him now, and we get to celebrate all that he does each day, but even more so as Christmas comes.